Okay, I want us to begin by trying to answer the question, what is the difference between the knowability of God and the knowledge of God? So knowability, the fact that God can be known. Knowledge, the fact that He knows, He can know. Can be known, knowability, He knows, knowledge. So let's read together, and someone please, if you can, volunteer to read Psalm 139, verse 1 through to 6. Psalm 139 and verse 1 through to 6. Okay. So the psalmist is acknowledging the fact that God knows. And I'm sure you know that psalm well. It is a psalm that is esteemed, greatly esteemed by the Hebrews, by the Jews, as the most excellent in the whole book of Psalms. The material you read there, the verses you read there are majestic, they are noble, they are sublime, the style is exalted, and the context appears to have been that David was suffering heavy slander at the hands of his enemies. They branded him as a hypocrite. They branded him as being notorious, an impostor who pretended religion in order to cover and promote his own ambitious and wicked designs. So they branded him all these things. And he found comfort in the fact that God knew him. So it's like people are speaking ill of you, and they don't really know you, but they are speaking ill of you. They are describing you in very disparaging terms, and you really have no way of clearing your name, of vindicating yourself. But when you remember that God knows you, okay, He knows everything about you, there in your comfort lies. And there you must rest. So I want us to just take a few moments to think about this doctrine of the knowledge of God. Now, David says of the Lord in verse 1, "You know me, O Lord, you know me." Have you noted that? "O Lord, you know me." When God knows, the meaning is that He has an intellectual apprehension of the truth. Okay? He has an intellectual apprehension of the truth. And He knows the truth about all things, whatever they are. He knows all things possible. So He knows the possible as being possible. He knows all things actual. He knows the actual as being actual. He knows all things necessary. He knows the necessary as necessary, the free as free, the past as past, the present as present, and the future as future. God knows all. He is perfectly acquainted with every detail in the life of every individual in heaven, on earth, and in hell. So it is this knowledge that David applied to himself. What are the characteristics of the knowledge of God? What are the characteristics of the knowledge of God? There are a number indicated in Psalm 139. The first characteristic is that it is intuitive. Okay? The knowledge of God is intuitive. What is meant by that? What is your understanding of an intuition? It is said that women have a greater intuition than men. What is an intuition? And what is it then for God to know intuitively? Okay? Like a gut feel. Okay? Anyone else? Yes? Okay, so what you are saying is that it's knowledge from within as opposed to knowledge from an external source. I think often an intuition is a way of knowing things directly and immediately by one's own light. In other words, you know what you know, not because you heard it from someone, not because you learned it from someone. It's just there, it's within you, it's a sense you have. Okay? It's a sense you have. Talking about women's intuition, it's not always reliable, by the way. Okay? But sometimes they will tell you that they know. You say, how do you know? She says, I just know. So it's immediacy of knowledge, okay? You just know something immediately and directly by your own light. And in this regard, we read here in Psalm 139, David's testimony. David is saying God did not know him by experience or by instruction or indeed by a process of research and reasoning. God didn't know him that way. God knew David even before he was born. Have you seen that? Even before he was born. How did God know David? By intuitive ability. He knows him immediately, he knows him directly. And God knows everything in that way, intuitively. Not because someone taught him, or he did a research, or he learned by experience. He knows directly, he knows immediately. The second characteristic of the knowledge of God is that it is comprehensive. It is comprehensive. You read in Psalm 139, verse 2 to 5, all the things that he knew. In regard to David, God knew everything there was to be known about David. For example, in verse 2, he knew his every posture and gesture, every exercise and pursuit. You know when I sit and when I stand. You watch me as I walk or when I'm lying down. All of my ways are open to you. He knew his every state and action by night and by day, in public and in secret. He knew every thought that passed through his mind. Every thought. God knows comprehensively. So we can expand this from the individual David to everything else that there is to be known. God knows everything comprehensively. So it is intuitive, it is comprehensive. Thirdly, it is thorough. It is thorough. And that this is the case can easily be seen from the words of the psalmist. In verse 1, he says, "O Lord, you know me and you have searched me." Have you seen that? "O Lord, you know me and you have searched me." Searching implies a thorough investigation, exact intelligence, precise understanding. Nothing is left out. And then you come across the word discerns, verse 3. Oh Lord, you know me, and you have searched me. You know when I sit and when I stand. You watch me as I walk or when I'm lying down. Now in verse 3 it says, you comprehend my path. NIV says, you watch me as I walk. Some versions would say, you discern my path and my lying down. You discern. And what does that mean? It's like when one winnows wheat and chaff. So he separates them. He sees them for what they are and learns the quality and the quantity of each. God knows all about our ways. He understands them. He has that kind of discernment. Nothing bypasses his mind. And then he says in verse 5, you have hedged me. You know what a hedge is? Like a fence. You have hedged me behind and before. You have hedged me. The word to hedge, it refers to a line of bushes, a fence, used as a wall. It would be a wall around a field or a wall around a garden. And the knowledge of God, he says, has fenced me. Okay? It has fenced me. So it's all around me. It's just another way of saying God knows everything about me. So it is intuitive, it is comprehensive, it is thorough. Now, let's just dig in a little bit. If this is how God knows, intuitively, comprehensively, thoroughly, what does he know? Now, we've described that in some general way when we say he knows everything, but perhaps we can be a little more precise and say that, number one, he knows our past. He knows our past. When verse 5 says, you hedge me behind, okay? You've put a fence from behind. So that is an indication of the past. He knows the past. And then he says, you know, he says, you hedge me not just behind, but before. That is like speaking about the front, okay? Or the future, if you like. He knows our future. And then, his hand is laid upon us. Verse 5 says, you've hedged me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Your hand upon me. He has the power to investigate every department of our lives and to do that thoroughly. What are the practical implications of this? We are being a bit quick this afternoon. What are the implications of being known in this way? God knowing you in this way. Practical implications, yes. To be vulnerable before God, okay, yes. let me give you some practical implications, perhaps beginning with the context in which the psalm was being applied. Okay? If God knows everything, and that invariably means he knows everything about us. He knew everything about David. God could not overlook David's sincerity and David's honesty. Don't we feel like that sometimes when we are among people and they judge us wrongly, or they don't notice what we do, and so they don't express gratitude for however we might be serving them? Okay? And so what are you hiding in? You know, people are not noticing you. They are perhaps misjudging you. They think you are a hypocrite. So how do we use a doctrine like this? You know, we encourage ourselves in the view that God knows me. You know, he knows that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. He knew me from the time I was in my mother's womb. These people don't know me, but God does. He knows when I'm being honest. He knows when I'm being sincere. He knows when others do not think much of me. But I know my heart. I know I'm being sincere. I'm being honest. They may not know. But God knows. And this is what David was doing. He was hiding in God. God cannot overlook what David was doing. God cannot overlook David's character. He knew him from his heart. He desires truth in the inner parts. It is also true to say, perhaps to broaden the application away from the context in which David was writing this psalm, God knows us and he cannot be deceived. For example, if you are hiding a secret unbelief, okay, outwardly, you are showing that you believe, you're a believer. Outwardly, you are showing that. But inwardly, you actually are unbelieving. You are hiding a secret unbelief, okay? And you can't hide that from God. God will see that unbelief. You may be hiding a secret backsliding, okay? In your heart, you're backslidden. Outwardly, you are trying to put up appearances, okay? Outwardly, you are trying to do that. But inwardly, you are actually hiding your backsliding. And God knows all about that. Take a church like Ephesus in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 4. What was the problem with the church at Ephesus? They had? Yeah, they had lost their first love. But they were still a very busy church, a very active church. Yeah, inwardly they had actually lost their first love, but they were a very active church. And God knew about that. Okay? God knew what it is they were lacking at that time. And then the fourth thing, or is it the third thing? A realization of the fact that God knows all things must produce a doxological response from us. We've basically said that, after learning all that we have learned thus far on God must produce a doxological response. We must adore God. David says, this is too wonderful for me. He was adoring his God. And then the fourth point is that in the light of the knowledge of God, especially with respect to us, we must, in our walk, that is, when we are thinking, when we are speaking, when we are conducting ourselves, however we might be, we must, in our walk with him, aim at sincerity. Okay? We must, in our walk with him, aim at sincerity. We must aim at sincerity. How can you not be sincere in the presence of a God who knows everything you are doing and everything you are thinking? He sees every action you take. You can't pretend in the presence of such a God. You can't be a hypocrite in the presence of such knowledge. And then fourthly, meditation upon this fact. Meditation upon the fact that God knows is an effective means of preserving the soul from backsliding, from destructive entrances into our lives. Just to remind yourself that God knows what you are doing, will keep you holy, will move you to be careful, because God is watching. God knows. Living coram Deo, as we saw yesterday, is very important.